Most brokers understand either commercial real estate or business brokerage, but in this part of the country anyway, very few have understanding and experience in both. What do you think the distinction of our training in both CCI and the CBI or the IBBA training brings to the table as a broker?
Much more experience, much more knowledge, and the ability to handle a business sale where the owner of that business, manufacturing, distribution, service, he owns the building. And there are many advantages to selling them together. Nobody will overpay for a building more so than somebody who really wants to buy the business,
Right.
right? And you can actually structure those where you can slide some money, so to speak, from the business toward the building so that you have a larger chunk that you can 1031 after the sale.
Right.
Now, what makes guys like you and I special that do both of these partially is age, right? You have to be around a while to have some experience in both. The other thing is that the big commercial guys, the Cushmans, the Marcus Millichaps, the CBREs that sell commercial, they don't do business brokerage. They don't have anybody there. So we are an advantage, an asset, a benefit to anybody that owns their business and their building, their property, over just somebody that only sells the commercial real estate.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the training gives us the ability to look at various legal aspects, various agency aspects, and certainly be able to evaluate a business which is very different from the metrics that we use to evaluate the financial position of a real estate transaction. And I feel bad when I see a business listed by a real estate broker or agent, and it's obvious that they didn't know how to either price the business or even advertise the business. They don't know what things to put forth that are very important to a person that wants to buy a business. And the bad thing for that seller is I think a lot of potential buyers may walk right by not knowing what a good opportunity it is because the important or the proper information wasn't put together.
No, no, I agree. I'm working a deal right now with a CCIM in another state. And one of his questions was, would we put this on CoStar?
Hmm.
And, your reaction in your head, you're going, hell no, right?
Mhm.
But the point is, he is a CCIM. He's one of the top 10% of all the commercial brokers, sharp guy. But that was his question because he doesn't know. And the
Yeah,
answer is
that
fairly,
CoStar, but in a listing service like CoStar, one has to understand that the address and the business name going to be revealed. And another challenge or problem with that is CoStar is a service for commercial brokers. And so it's not public facing. And most commercial brokers are not searching CoStar to be able to or transact a business for their client. So you're right. I mean, it parks it in a dead end alley that is just not going to be helpful.
and you said sometimes or most of the times the confidentiality is important. I would say it's close to almost always. And you put it out there on CoStar, and CoStar will now put it on LoopNet. Right? You had no control over it. It is now on LoopNet. And if you've got a business that there's not a lot of them, and it mentions your city or your county, there's a good chance that an employee, a competitor, somebody might see that. We had a franchise, was one of the biggest ones in the country, and they had their own broker. And the company put out an ad, and we put out an ad. And if you looked at our ad, it was exciting, it was interesting, it made the phone ring, and you couldn't tell where it was or who it was. The company ad, their broker, you could tell exactly who it was, and the seller went nuts when he saw it. And he saw it because I showed it to him. The minute I saw it on BizBuySell, I did a copy and sent it to him. I said, you need to fix this quick because you could tell exactly who it was.
That's a good point. We rely on Biz by Sell a lot. I think they have about a 95% market share in the transaction space, especially for Main Street businesses. And without that, again, in that advertising, you're just throwing money, you're just missing the boat. You're advertising someplace, it's not a match.
Right.
And we still sometimes do letters and make phone calls and do social media as far as a billboard to, a pond where people are fishing for businesses. That is by far the most dominant place to put a listing.
To the point, to back up your point, it's so dominant, CoStar owns them.
Right.
CoStar bought them and a few others way back. So, yes, they have that market.
And it's a separate fee for which we get to participate in that service. But, so one thing a lot of people don't realize, you have both the CCIM and the CBI, and those are very different designations. They're different in purpose, they're different in training. The CCIM is basically training for investment type commercial real estate. It's all commercial. We do training as far as valuation, market studies, gap analysis, returns. A lot of it is the return that a buyer may get or that an owner would want to see on their commercial real estate. And so tell me a little bit about CBI, which is a designation of the International Business Brokers Association, and how that's really very different from CCIM.
Okay. Just what you said on CCIM is correct. It's the top 10% people who've taken time and money and invested those to be best at their profession, selling, investing, advising in commercial real estate. The CBI says, I did that for businesses. This is pretty much the same idea. A lot of education. And like the CCIM, you have to sell millions of dollars of product while you're doing it. It's not something you just say, oh, yeah, I took these courses, I get this designation. No, you've actually got to perform. On both of them, what's nice is if I see those initials on an email, I open it. It's a respect. And I've seen where a colleague will try and work with a broker and nobody will answer them. The brokers won't get back to them, but I'll send them an email on the same thing and I will get responded to because they see the initials. So what the CBI is a level of professionalism for selling the business instead of the commercial real estate. It's the things that are involved in it, the things that are financing, that's different for the businesses, the different industries, right? People hear about multiples of this, multiples of that. Every industry is a little bit different. Even in let's call it, pick an industry, and if they're doing X million, right? Period. And the other one's the same industry and they're doing X million. But one of those is mostly recurring revenues, like monthly memberships already signed up. That gets a higher multiple. It's worth more. Now, you can pretty much on a house or a building go look up on Zillow or some things and get an idea what a building is worth. You can't do that on a business. There's just
Right.
too many variables. So I would tell somebody, and I tell somebody, you want these initials. If you want the same kind of broker, you want somebody who's been around a while and he has the initials. Now, if you're using your nephew, your cousin, your neighbor, have them work with somebody. I'll do that. I've done that a lot. I'll come in and help somebody because I'm going to bring some things to the table that he doesn't have, knowledge they don't know yet. It seems to me that if you're going to get the biggest check of your life selling your business and your building, hire professionals that have been around a while, that know what they're doing, that aren't going to make a mistake that's going to cost you a lot of money. And you can tell because they've got the initials and some grit.
Now you're going to inspire me to take the test and get the initials, I think.
I was going to put you on that in Minneapolis anyway. IBBA has a real nice program right now for guys who've been around a couple years.
Certainly in Texas, in many states, there's no license requirement for a business broker. So literally anyone can sell a business. You might have a little more liability if you don't know what you're doing, but a well-intended brother-in-law could sell a business, but they may or may not have any idea what they're doing. We talk a lot and think a lot about selling the real estate alongside a business, but a business, it's very important that leases are evaluated well, along with facilities that are evaluated, the physical property of what somebody might be acquiring in a business transaction. What are some things that you see in a lease that are important that a business broker needs to call attention to and prepare the seller for?
Okay, so we have requirements. They're mandatory for a listing. If we're going to work with somebody, I want to see tax returns. I also want to see a P&L broken down if it's a bigger, a larger company. But I want to see the tax returns because I want to know what went into what you told the IRS, what you said, and that should match the bank pretty closely. I also want a lease. I need to see a copy of the lease because I need to see what the term is. I need to see if there's any extensions. Can you renew it? Does it have an automatic renewal? Is there a clause in there that says that at this point, no, we're doing, this is it. And you need those going in because otherwise you're just wasting time.
Yeah, I think that's very important when somebody calls and they're thinking about selling their business and maybe they have less than a year left on their lease. There's really not much to sell because if you can't tie up some kind of extension, you would have to buy that business and basically get your return in about 6 months.
What good is that? So there are times when you can, but our procedures, and that's over a 30-year period, have come to the point where we get the lease, and if there's not enough time left on it, we go to the landlord. I want to talk to the landlord, have a conversation. He's a landlord. All he cares about is he's going to get his check every month. The people who are going to be there are going to be legal and pay the rent.
Mhm.
Sometimes not in that order. He just wants paying the rent, and then he can worry later about if they're legal. But I've never seen that where the landlord wouldn't either say, sure, long as your credit's good, long as this, long as that, I'll extend it. We'll be glad to do that. We like them, da da da. Or no, I own a building on the unit on each side, and as soon as he's done, our plan is to make that a 3-bay, for our store. Okay, going in, not really much to sell there. Or you have to go out and find another location real close by because nobody's going to have to want to drive too far. But a lot of times the seller, he already knows these things. And when he starts humming and hawing, that's why.
Well, and that's gonna discount the price because we all know that when a business moves, if it's a consumer-facing business, they're going to leave customers behind. Maybe it's not convenient, maybe they can't find it, whatever the reason, the lack of some type of longer-term lease is not very helpful. And I was also thinking in the terms of facility, especially in this day when technology is changing so quickly, one, and number two, when we're beginning to onshore more manufacturing within the industrial space, since we have an eye for looking at properties, is being able to look at power loads and floor loads, ceilings. I was working for a client in the commercial real estate space. Beautiful building, had a 40-foot ceiling, but the fire code wouldn't let them go over 20 feet. And so they couldn't even put their racks in this building. And so those are the kind of things where we bring our commercial real estate expertise in. And, so in those instances, we would work with a seller to identify those things ahead of time and be able to at least build a story of why this business can be successful with the current constraints or what could be done to change it.
Yep. You make a great point there. And at that point where you're bringing in a new business, you need to watch those. And I've seen those same constraints, right? I got a 40-foot building, but hey, the fire code is this, right? But if you're selling the business and the building together, you're selling the business and they're leasing that building, they're already there. Most
Yes.
of the time, that's going to go in there. The exception there is if they own the building and they're operating, they might be grandfathered in on sprinklers. But now that they're going to sell, Oops, it's got to be sprinkled. A way around that, just sell the business and the owner can keep the building and do a slow sale, a rent to own, a rent to lease, whatever you want to call it, phrase it. I'll leave that to the attorneys, where you didn't have to put in sprinklers. But those are the kind of things you can do that you see over time and experience. I want to go back a little bit on liability. Yes, there's huge liability on business sales. Yeah, we're both part of EXP Commercial, 80,000 residential agents, that they can sell a commercial property. They cannot sell businesses. They cannot. And that's a liability. The people at the top, at the law firm that watches all of our tails, they've decided that there's just too much risk in a business sale from somebody who's not a professional at it. So they can't do it. They must refer it to us.
Right. Yeah, and that dovetails in with my next thought, and that is environmental issues, which can create a lot of tremendous liability for the buyer and the seller. And that's an aspect in commercial real estate with our commercial real estate background and training that we look at and we understand. And we, especially if we are including the sale of a property, we are going to highly suggest that a phase one environmental study is conducted to look at what potential issues might come up.
On a commercial side, you're absolutely right. That would be, as CCIMs, that'll be our responsibility. On a selling and business side, it's our responsibility to let the seller know that the bank, the lender, is going to demand at least a phase one. That's part of the checklist with the SBA. So we're not the bad guy at that point, but it's got to be done. And again, there's ways around it if you're experienced. If you just selling a building and it comes back dirty, generally the buyer says, "No, I'm out. I'll go find something else." But again, that somebody who just wants that business will pay more or do more to get it. They'll buy that business. They won't buy the building. They'll lease the building. And then later, after they've had time to clean up whatever environmental issues there are, they'll buy the building. Now, we don't get the full commission. We get the commission on the sale of the business, but the seller still gets top dollar for it and it doesn't die.
Well, and I would say also we work with these things with environmental issues on all of our commercial real estate transactions. And we often, it's not the horrible thing that it sounds like when you get a phase one study back and there's a possible underground storage device or a tank or potential asbestos. And so with our experience, we can talk through the buyer or the seller and help them understand. We can put them in contact with the environmental firm and just help them get a better understanding that just because you cut your toe doesn't mean you have to amputate your foot.
Nope. And you mentioned environmental. So as a CCIM, you and I both go to all kinds of meetings and functions, and there's monthly meetings. I don't remember an environmental company as a sponsor or being there, not saying they weren't, but as part of a business broker association, I can't remember when there wasn't one or two environmental companies as sponsors.
Hmm.
They're there every month and we have a go-to. They know exactly what their roles are. So when it comes up, we don't have to go looking for somebody. We know who to call.
We know who to call that does good work and may be reasonably priced. There's a great deal of elasticity in environmental work. And if you're just Googling who's in the area, you may end up paying 2, 3, 4, 5 times the amount for a phase one that you would otherwise that you should pay. Which, speaking of paying, so in the business brokerage world, the SBA is, I would say, critical. Certainly a key factor in a lot of transactions. And I noticed SBA Ray did a post recently that said the volume is down 25% in 2026 over 2020 fiscal year 2025, which was the peak. And a lot of that's because the rules have changed. One of the things we do as business brokers is we have relationships with SBA lenders that are familiar with the sale of a business. And even though most banks can do an SBA guarantee on their loans, there's a big difference in an SBA lender that specializes in business sales.
No, absolutely. So let me hit both of those. So yes, SBA is important. It's critical because the difference is, and I'll use a piece of commercial property, a $2 million piece of business or a building at a 40% down, right? Because that's 40% equity in is normal on a commercial process. It's 10 on the SBA side. So instead of having to come up with $800,000 cash, you come up with two.
Mhm.
It's a whole lot easier. There's a whole lot more people with 200 cash than there are 800 for the same thing. I'm going to take that back to the lease a little bit ago. If the SBA is involved in the business purchase, the lease must have enough extensions to cover the period of the loan. So if you have a 10-year loan, you can use the SBA to work with the landlord to say, look, I don't need a 10-year lease, but I need at least 10 one-year extensions. Somewhere in the middle, we can make this work, but it has to be available.
Right.
But the SBA is critical. I'd love to see numbers on what the non-visa numbers were in 2025 versus non-visa 2026. Because I don't think the non-visa, non-coming over are down. I think they're up for two reasons. One, businesses sales are up, right? The silver tsunami is here.
Well, there were other regulatory changes such as licensing requirements for like plumbing companies, for example. You in the past could have someone stay on as a minority owner and use their license. And I think now you have to be an active participant in the new entity. And in fact, it's interesting also in this same report that the big banks stepped up and underwrote a lot of the business transactions, or a significant amount, hundreds of millions in 24, but they've, for the most part, fallen off 40 to 60% with these new regulations that, if nothing else, you need to make sure that you're compliant.
Yeah, pushing compliance more and more. Just take a quick side on this. One of the things that is bringing that up is AI. It used to be you'd have to send a team of people or real people out to actually look at a facility and count people and go through records. Now AI can do that in for small fractions of the time, right? So they're doing more. But most of it has been, I'll call it legal compliance. Some of the immigration, some of the E2 visas, the H1Bs, the new demand that how much money they have, what we're doing or not doing, if you can get the visa at all for cash, if you can get an SBA loan for it. That's a procedural thing and we have to deal with it.
Well, and also, as of March 1st, the SBA will only fund transactions for U.S. naturalized citizens. So it's cut the pool somewhat from the worldwide pool that was attracted in 22, 23, and 24. I'm not sure why it fell so much from 25 to 26, other than maybe it was just a lag from the peak, because a business transaction isn't a quick transaction.
Right. On those visas, you can still get those visas if you have money. If you have plenty of money and you're not of certain areas, you can buy a business and get a visa. You just can't get a loan. It's
Right.
guaranteed by the SBA.
Correct. Yeah.
So that part has damaged it a little bit, right? It's going to slow that down. But that means there's just more money here for American business owners or business owner wannabes to buy their business because the SBA is lending. And at 10% down, if you have just a business, it's generally 10% down and a 10-year note. If you bring the real estate in, it's still 10% down, and they'll make it a 20 or 25-year note on all of it. So a lot of times buying a real estate is much more beneficial to cash flow than just buying the business.
So, Tom, in this world of business purchases, what do you think? I guess we sort of know what owners are most interested in, and that is the dollars, the price. How much am I going to get paid? But what do you think business owners usually miss in putting their business on the market for sale?
Hiring qualified people because they'll listen to an attorney, an accountant who just happens to know somebody. And now with the silver tsunami, there's a lot of startups, got companies that have been around 2 years that touting, oh, we've done this and we do that. Well, they've done it for a year. Find somebody like us who've done it for 20, 25, 30 years. Our experience speaks for itself. Most business owners, they don't plan the back end well. We just had one that we put back on the back burner because we were ready to sign. And I said, I haven't heard any plans, folks. When we're done, when we sell this, what are you going to do? And they didn't know. And the husband said, that's been bothering me. And I said, well, then let's not do this, because until you're ready, we don't want to go down that road, or we're going to be a day or two before closing and you're going to want to not do this.
Yeah, I think you just pointed out the exact pitfall is you might get a buyer, you might get everybody excited, you might identify all the terms and negotiate everything, and then it blows up at the end with cold feet
But
because they
that,
don't know.
yeah, but again, that's part of the experience. I saw it, right? If they're not saying, I got this RV and we've got a plan, or we're going to Europe, or, we're going to go see all the grandkids and we're going to stay here with them. If there's no plan, once they sell it, once they're gone, you need to address that. But that's an experience thing. Otherwise, they're going to be a week, 2 days before closing, and they're going to back out.
Would say also that one of the things I see that business owners miss is the value of systems, accounting systems, operating systems, personnel systems, things that have been defined so that a new owner can come in and at least know the rules, if you will, of how a company has been run. And every new owner's going to make some changes probably. But I don't think a lot of owners fully understand the effect that has on price and desirability of a business.
I agree 100% with that. And it's hard to tell a guy who's owned it for 40 some years. He's raised his family, his kids, put them through college. Well, Bill, you're not doing this right. Right. That's a very touchy conversation. But you're absolutely right. There are times when our counseling of, all right, here's some things we need to do. Here's some things that will cost you X, but it'll make it 2 or 3 or 4 times more, valuable for you. And there's been a lot of conversations where you try to explain, well, here's something you can do to smooth your accounting. And he'll go, I know, but she's been with me for 42 years. Let the next guy fire her, or let the next guy do that. I'm not going to do that. Okay, we understand. I can still put that into the presentation and explain to a buyer why it hasn't been changed, why that system is missing when I got A, B, D. Why they miss C? Well, this is why. So you explain it to the buyer understands it, and the buyer may or may not change it in the first year or two, but he understands it, and you can put that number back into the valuation.
What do you think makes a business harder to sell when you're in the middle of you've advertised it, you've got some people interested? What adds friction?
Agreed. You explain to somebody multiple times why it's valued at X. And you explain to 3 or 4 qualified buyers who've proven the funds, and they're coming in and now they're putting in letters of intent, offers, discussions. And all of a sudden, somebody gets a little proud. Well, if there's this many people willing to pay X, I want to raise this, or I want to do that. No, that'll kill that deal. That'll kill that buyer, because now you're not honest. Once we've taken it to market, there's an offer on the table and we're moving forward, and the bank is happy, the buyer's happy, they get along. They generally run right through to closing. Everybody's happy.
Uh, It's greed and fear. The IBBA conference, the national conference, is coming up. What do you think is valuable about hopping on an airplane and going to the IBBA national conference?
This one, I'll answer that 2 things. So, all the conferences, this is your profession. This is what you're doing for a living. This is the annual meeting of all the top people. You want to be there. You want people to see you there. you're networking with some of the other people from across the country you don't get to see all the time. And then later, when you need something or they need something from you, or you want to work a deal together, there's something in their neighborhood and in their state, you've already got that camaraderie going. The other thing is all the vendors, right? There's new products, there's new things that, AI. Come on, 2 years ago, we didn't know what AI was. Now there'll be half a dozen vendors talking about different ways to use AI to do things better. I'm definitely going to be bringing people over to the EXP booth because EXP Commercial is going to have a table there. And what better opportunity to show somebody how to sell businesses and property nationwide than to have some of the people from corporate at EXP Commercial there?
Right. I think AI is exactly right. I've put together a new format that I can do recasting, which used to take me a half a day in minutes, and identify, we can spend more time, working with the seller and identify ways that we might could make things better or what that means for what they've got, what they're trying to accomplish.
If I'm going to leave anybody with anything from today, it's if you're going to hire somebody to sell your business with or without real estate, get some initials. If they don't have the CBI, have them find somebody that does, or make sure that they've been around a while. It's not a fly by night company. They just didn't start doing this. They're not doing it part time. And if you're doing commercial real estate, get the initials CCIM. I'm not an SIOR, but that's just, in my mind, it's the same level. I mean, they do. You've got SIOR, CCIM, CBI. And if somebody's been around 15, 18 years, they got no initials, they're still on a basic license, those are red flags.
Right. It probably says either they don't have a lot of initiative or they're not really doing the volume.
How hard are they going to work for the seller?
To tie into the initials and the experience, because every business can or should be sold. And that's not the case. And with our experience, with our training, we can identify that early on and just help people not waste their time because we have the experience to know what the likelihood is of a successful outcome.
Yeah.
Save their time, save their money.
Yep. And it's not our first rodeo, right? So no matter what somebody throws at us at this point, we've seen it and we know how to handle it, right? Like we talked about the environmental. Well, here's a way around it, right? There's same thing with the roof, right? You've had building sales go sideways because of the roof. Okay, but the business sale can go on. You can still rent the building. And the buyer and seller can work on the roof issue later. There's lots of ways to do these, but we've seen them. We're not going to get any surprises.
It was great to visit today, and we'll continue this talk next week at IBBA National Conference. And until then, have a good afternoon.
All right, great to see you. See you in Minneapolis.
All right. Bye, Tom.